we'll be doing NC State. First, I'll talk a little bit about their head coach, and then I'll talk some about the roster, and then I'll go through their schedule game by game and give you a predicted winner and loser for each game. Head coach Dave Doeren enters his 12th season as the head coach of NC State and his 14th season as a head coach. He was a head coach at one other place before NC State at Northern Illinois, where he got them to a 23-4 record in 2 seasons. And his record at NC State is 81-58, and his overall record as a head coach is 104-62. And I think he's a pretty good coach. And I'm not just saying that. On my channel, if you've watched me enough, you know that I don't just say any coach is good just to make fans of the team that are watching my videos happy. If I think a coach is horrible, I'll say it. I've said so many times on my channel that I think Deion Sanders is a horrible football coach. But Dave Doeren hasn't had a great season in his time at NC State. He's never won the conference, but he's had them consistently at winning 8 or 9 games a season. And he's not a great recruiter, but he's done a pretty good job with player development, especially on the defensive side. Uh, so now, starting on the offensive side of the roster, NC State's offense was not very good last season, only averaging 25.7 points per game, and that was because of horrible quarterback play. They ranked 100th in the country in passing yards per game last season, and I think they made a huge upgrade at quarterback, bringing in a good quarterback from the portal, Grayson McCall from Coastal Carolina, who had there in 42 games 10,005 passing yards and 88 touchdown passes, and had a 9.8 yards per throw average and completed 70% of his passes. He was one of the top quarterbacks in the transfer portal this year. I think he'll be good for them. And then at wide receiver, they do have one really good receiver, one of the best receivers in the ACC, Kevin Conception, who had last season 71 catches for 839 and 10 touchdowns, averaging 11.8 a catch. And he also ran some too, having 320 rushing yards on 41 carries. But other than him, they are questionable at the wide receiver position. And I know it's great to have a wide receiver like him, but they're going to need him to have some help to have a great passing game, even with a good quarterback. Now, they did bring in a good tight end transfer from Connecticut, Justin Jolie, who had last season 56 catches for 578 and 2 touchdowns, averaging 10.3 a catch. He'll help them out with the pass catching. And then at running back, I think they've upgraded here. They brought in a good running back from Duke, Jordan Waters, who had last season 819 yards on 153 carries and 12 touchdowns, averaging 5.4 a carry. And he had 3 games of over 100 rushing yards. But other than him, they are kind of questionable at running back. And to have a really strong run game, you really need 2 good running backs at least. And then on the offensive line, I think they're going to be good here. They returned 4 starters, including left tackle Anthony Bentleton, who had only allowed 2 sacks and 20 total pressures last season. And they also bring in a really good center from Notre Dame, Zeke Correll, who has started 31 games there. And last season didn't allow any sacks and only allowed 11 pressures. So their offense should be better this season. And then now on the defensive side, they had a pretty good defense last year, only giving up on average 20.8 points per game. But I do think they will take a little bit of a step back on that side of the ball this season because they do lose a lot of players. But the head coach, Dave Doeren, has always seemed to do a pretty good job coaching the defensive side. So I would expect him to have a pretty good defense again. So on the defensive line, they're not great, but they do have one really good player coming back, David Vaughn, who had last season 42 tackles, 5.5 sacks, 35 total pressures, and a forced fumble and fumble recovery and a pass breakup. And then at linebacker, they do lose here their best player from last season on the team, Peyton Wilson, who actually ended up winning the Defensive Player of the Year award. So I do think they'll take a step back at linebacker, losing him. He's one of those players that it's just going to be really hard to replace. But they do still have a couple of pretty good players at this position. Caden Fordham, who had last season only starting 2 games, but played 410 snaps, 53 tackles, and 2 pass uh, rushes, and a pass breakup. And then they've got Shane Brown, who had 66 tackles and 2 sacks and 2 interceptions and 5 pass breakups and a forced fumble last season. And then in the secondary, at cornerback, they've got a really good cornerback coming back, Aiden White, who has in 25 games a total of 83 tackles and 6 interceptions and 2 sacks and 19 pass breakups. And he hasn't allowed a touchdown catch in the last 2 seasons. And they bring in a transfer corner from Villanova, uh, Devin Marshall, who should help them out. He had last season 47 tackles and 11 pass breakups. And then at safety, they are really good here. They've got depth and talent. They return Devin Boykin, who is a really good safety. He had in 11 games last season 54 tackles and 3 interceptions and a forced fumble and a pass breakup. And then they also have Bishop Fitzgerald, who only started 3 games, but played 537 snaps and had 42 tackles and 3 pass breakups and 2 interceptions. And they bring in a transfer, KJ Martin, who has played for both West Virginia and Akron, and has in 34 college games 148 tackles and 3 interceptions and 12 pass breakups. And they also bring in a transfer from Syracuse, Jihad Carter, who has in 31 games in college, 138 tackles and 5 interceptions and 7 pass breakups and 2 fumble recoveries and a forced fumble. And on special teams, they do get their punter back, but they do lose their kicker. So now moving on to the predictions, they start the year against Western Carolina, which will be a very easy win. And then they have a big non-conference game against Tennessee on a neutral site. So I think this will be a close game. Both teams are pretty similar, but I do think Tennessee is a little bit better than NC State on both sides of the ball, and I think they're better at the line of scrimmage. And the team that controls the line of scrimmage usually wins the game. So I'm going with Tennessee. Uh, so then they play Louisiana Tech, should be a pretty easy win. And then another big game on the road at Clemson. So I could see this one going either way. NC State and Clemson are pretty similar teams now. Clemson, though, is still more talented than NC State. And if this was at NC State, I would pick NC State, but I just doubt that they're going to win at Clemson. So then Northern Illinois should be an easy win. And then Wake Forest. Wake Forest is a team that to be really good, or really to be any good at all, they have to have a good quarterback, and they don't right now. So I think they'll beat Wake Forest pretty easily. Then Syracuse at home probably will be a pretty close game. Syracuse, has made some nice additions in the transfer portal and has a lot of production coming back. They might be a decent team, but I still think that NC State is better, and they've got a much more experienced head coach than Syracuse does. So I think they win this one. And then at California, so if you watch my Miami video from a couple of days ago, you heard me say that the only thing tough for them about playing California this year is having to travel to the opposite side of the country to play them. And the same thing goes for NC State. NC State is a much better team than California, and I do think that they will beat them by a couple of touchdowns. So then Stanford, another team that's horrible, but they're even more horrible than California is. One of the worst teams in the country, and NC State gets them at home. They'll win no problem. And then uh, they play Duke, another team that is not going to be very good this year. They just lose too much and a really good coach. But they are going to be a little bit better than Stanford is going to be. So it probably won't be a blowout, but I do think that NC State will win this one by a couple of scores, at least 10 points. And then they play on the road at Georgia Tech. So if you watch my Miami video, you also heard me say that I think Georgia Tech is going to beat a couple of uh, teams in the ACC this year that they're not supposed to beat, and I think this is another one that they're going to get. NC State, I think, is a little bit better than Georgia Tech. I don't think Georgia Tech is a great team, but they do have some strengths to their team. Their offensive line is, I think, a little better than NC State's, and I think they're a better running team than NC State is. Now, I don't think they have quite as good of a quarterback as NC State is going to have, but their quarterback is decent. And Georgia Tech's front seven is not going to be very good, I don't think, but their secondary is pretty good to where I think they could give NC State's quarterback some problems. I think it'll be really close, though. And then they end the season on the road at North Carolina in the rivalry game. So I know about how NC State has beat North Carolina the last two seasons, and North Carolina is a team that has underperformed when they've had Drake May, who ended up being a first round quarterback, and he's gone now, and about how Mac Brown is way past his prime as a football coach. But when you compare rosters with these two teams, like I actually did last night, they do match up pretty well with NC State. North Carolina does. And this game, I think, probably will be Mac Brown's last regular season game as a football coach. Was I think he's going to retire after this season. So I think he's badly going to want to get one more pretty good win as a coach. So I think North Carolina will be really motivated for this game, and I think they pull the upset. But I do think this will be really close, and NC State for sure could win this game, and they could win the Georgia Tech game. But my final prediction for NC State is 8-4 overall and 5-3 in the conference. I think they're a team that is a little above average, but that's about it. I don't think they're a great team or a team that is going to play for the ACC championship this season. Now, I do think NC State is a possibility to win the ACC championship this season because the ACC, is a horrible conference, and NC State is a solid team. Uh, and when you actually look at NC State's roster, it's not great overall, but they do have an above average coach, a top 25 head coach, in my opinion, to where they should still have a pretty good season. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they went 9-3 and won either the Georgia Tech or North Carolina game. But I do feel pretty confident in picking them to lose the Tennessee and Clemson games. And you can tell me in the comments that I just hate NC State and they're going 13-0, winning the ACC this year, if that makes you feel better. And I wouldn't care if they did. I don't mind if NC State wins the ACC this year, but I just think it is highly unlikely. But that will be it with this video, and please subscribe, and thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.